Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The door was ajar by less than an inch, a sliver of darkness cutting through the gilded ivory of the hallway, but it was enough to shatter an empire. I didn't gasp. I didn't flinch. I simply checked the diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe on my wrist and noted the time, 4:45 p.m. 15 minutes before I was scheduled to walk down the aisle of the Grand Cathedral of Ethelgard. Through that narrow gap, the sounds were unmistakable. The wet, desperate sounds of skin against skin, punctuated by the low, guttural growl of an alpha claiming his territory. "My alpha," said Eric Thorne, the crown prince of the industrial sector, the man who had sworn eternal fealty to me 3 months ago in front of the entire High Council. But the whimper that followed didn't belong to me. It belonged to a petite, terrified Omega, likely one of the florists given the pollen dust still clinging to the discarded apron on the floor. I should have kicked the door down. I should have screamed until the crystal chandeliers shook and the stained glass shattered. That is what a broken heart does. That is what a victim does. But I am Lysander Vance. And the Vances do not scream. We calculate. I raised my phone, the camera lens silent and unblinking, and recorded exactly 10 seconds of footage. Just enough to identify the faces. Just enough to capture the distinctive birthmark on Cedric's lower back. Then, I pocketed the device, smoothed the invisible wrinkles on my white silk tuxedo, and walked away. The rhythm of my heels against the marble floor was steady, a metronome counting down to an execution. The preparations for the wedding of the century had been gruesome in their extravagance. The union of the Vance family, owners of the continent's largest shipping and logistics empire, and the Thorns, who controlled the military-industrial complex, was not a romance. It was a merger disguised as a fairy tale. I stood before the full-length mirror in the private dressing suite, staring at a stranger. My silver hair had been styled into soft waves that framed a face too pale, too sharp to be considered purely angelic. My eyes, usually a piercing sapphire, looked dull under the layer of exhaustion I had been fighting for weeks. The Omega collar around my neck was made of platinum and white gold, studded with diamonds that cost more than the GDP of a small nation. It was beautiful. It was a chokehold. "You look breathtaking, Lysander," my mother said, her voice devoid of warmth as she adjusted the flower on my lapel. "Cedric is a lucky man. Ensure you do not bore him tonight. The merger depends on an heir within the year." "Of course, mother," I replied, my voice a smooth, practiced baritone. She didn't smell the distress on me because I had learned to suppress my pheromones years ago. It was a rare trait, a defect according to some, but a weapon to me. An Omega who could hide his scent was an Omega who could hide his fear. "He is spirited," my father added, checking his pocket watch. "But he is an alpha. They have appetites. As his consort, your duty is to look the other way should he wander, provided he returns to your bed at night. Do you understand?" "I understand perfectly," I said. And I did. I understood that to them, I was not a son. I was a broodmare with a bank account. I understood that Cedric's infidelity wasn't a surprise to them. It was a calculated risk they had already accepted on my behalf. But they had made a critical error. They assumed I was playing the same game. The organ music swelled, shaking the floorboards. It was time. As I walked toward the massive oak doors of the sanctuary, a shadow detached itself from the alcove near the entrance. The air temperature dropped 10 degrees, and a scent hit me. Dark chocolate, gunsmoke, and rain. It was a scent so potent, so dominating, it made my knees threaten to buckle, triggering an instinctive biological submission I had to fight to suppress. General Kalen Drax, the Black Wolf of the Northern Front. He was leaning against a marble pillar, his dress uniform pristine, but worn with a rugged carelessness that terrified most courtiers. A jagged scar ran from his jaw down to his collar, vanishing beneath the high neck of his tunic. He was the Emperor's executioner, a man who didn't play politics, he ended them. And he was the sworn enemy of the Thorn family. "You smell like tragedy, little prince," Kalen murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. He didn't bow. He never bowed. I stopped, signaling my entourage to wait. "General Drax, I'm surprised you received an invitation. Cedric usually prefers not to have his predators in the room." Kalen pushed off the pillar, towering over me. He was a true alpha, a rarity even among the elite. His presence alone was enough to make lesser alphas choke. I came to see if the rumors were true, that the smartest Omega in the capital was willingly walking into a slaughterhouse. His golden eyes bored into mine, seeing too much. Kalen knew, said Eric. He knew the cruelty that hid behind the prince's golden smile. It's a wedding, General. Not a funeral, I said coldly. With said Eric Thorne, there is no difference, Kalen countered, stepping closer. The intensity of his pheromones spiked, wrapping around me like a protective cloak, clashing with the sterile scent of the church. Walk away, Lysander. There is a car waiting at the east gate. I can have you out of the city before the first toast. For a second, the mask slipped. I looked at him, really looked at him. Kalen Drax was offering me salvation. He was offering me an escape from a loveless, abusive future. If I went with him, I would be a pariah, my family ruined, my name mud. But I would be free. But freedom wasn't enough. I didn't just want to survive, said Eric Thorne. I wanted to destroy him. I appreciate the offer, General, I whispered, leaning in so only he could hear. But I don't run. I wait. Kalen's eyes narrowed, intrigued. He searched my face, looking for the tremor of fear, but found only ice. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face, a predator recognizing another. Then give him hell, Vance, he said, stepping back and gesturing for me to proceed. I'll be watching. The ceremony was a blur of flashbulbs and hollow vows. Cedric stood at the altar, looking like a god of sunlight. His blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile dazzling the thousands of guests and the millions watching the live stream. He took my hands, his palms warm and slightly damp. I, Cedric, take you, Lysander, to be my wedded partner, he recited, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. To honor and cherish, forsaking all others, until death do us part. Forsaking all others, the words hung in the air, heavy with irony. I watched his eyes. They were glazed, slightly unfocused. He was likely high on the adrenaline of his backstage tryst, thinking himself invincible. He squeezed my hand, a silent warning to play along, to be the perfect doll. I, Lysander, take you. I paused. The silence stretched a second too long. A ripple of unease went through the front row. Cedric's smile tightened, his nails digging into my skin. Take you, Cedric. I finished, my voice soft, to be exactly what you deserve. The priest missed the double meaning. The crowd sighed in relief. The rings were exchanged. The kiss was chaste, but I tasted the mint he had used to cover the scent of another Omega. It made bile rise in my throat. As we walked back down the aisle, married in the eyes of the law and God, Cedric leaned close to my ear. The cameras caught it as a romantic whisper. You were stiff, he hissed. Tonight, you will make up for it. And Lysander, if you ever look at another alpha the way you looked at Drax in the hallway, I'll have you locked in the country estate for the rest of your life. I smiled, waving to the crowd. We'll see, husband. We'll see. The reception was held in the Crystal Hall of the Imperial Palace. It was a grotesque display of wealth. Towers of champagne, fountains of chocolate, and a sea of dignitaries trying to outdo each other in sycophancy. I sat at the head table, the untouched meal cooling in front of me. Cedric was already on his fourth glass of wine, laughing loudly with his generals. He had his hand draped over the back of my chair, a possessive gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a cage. From across the room, in the shadows of the mezzanine, I saw the glint of golden eyes. Kalen Drax was leaning against the railing, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, watching, waiting. Then I saw him. The boy from the hallway. He was dressed in a waiter's uniform, trembling as he poured water for the guests at the Thorne family table. Cedric noticed him too. I saw the smirk, the cruel glint in Cedric's eyes. He beckoned the boy over. You, Cedric said loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. This wine is corked. Take it back. The boy went pale. Your Highness, I just opened it. Are you questioning me? Cedric snapped, his alpha voice booming. The room went silent. The music faltered. Insolent little rat. Perhaps you need to be taught a lesson in obedience. He was doing it for sport. He was humiliating the boy he had bedded an hour ago just to flex his power, to show everyone that he could break things and no one would stop him. My father looked away. My mother sipped her wine. No one moved. Except me. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor echoed like a gunshot. Cedric, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Sit down, Lysander, Cedric growled, not looking at me. I'm dealing with staff. Actually, I said, walking around the table to the center of the dais. I took the microphone from the stunned MC. I think you've done enough. Cedric turned slowly, his face flushing with anger. What are you doing? You are embarrassing me. Embarrassment is a fleeting emotion, Cedric, I said, addressing the room. Ruin, however, lasts a lifetime. The murmurs began. Cedric stood up, his fists clenched. Cut the mic. Someone get my husband off the stage. He's clearly overwhelmed. I am perfectly calm, I said, meeting his gaze. In fact, I have never been clearer. You see, distinguished guests, the union between House Vance and House Thorne was predicated on a contract. A contract with very specific clauses regarding fidelity and honor. Lysander. My father stood up, horrified. Stop this madness at once. Clause 4, Section B. I continued, ignoring my father. Should either party be found in breach of fidelity after the signing of the prenuptial agreement, but before the consummation of the marriage, the contract is null and void. Furthermore, the offending party forfeits 50% of their liquid assets to the aggrieved as a penalty for breach of faith. Cedric laughed. It was a nervous, jagged sound. You're insane. Breach of fidelity? I have been by your side all day. Have you? I pulled a small remote from my pocket and pointed it at the massive holographic screen behind us, which had been displaying a slideshow of our childhood photos. I pressed the button. The image shifted. The beautiful, orchestrated photos vanished. In their place, high-definition video footage began to play. It was the hallway. The door ajar. The timestamp was clearly visible. Today, for 45 p.m., the audio was crisp. The moans, the degrading things Cedric whispered to the boy, the very boy currently shaking with a water pitcher in his hand, filled the silent ballroom. Star. Don't worry about Lysander. He's a frigid statue. You're the one I want. He's just the bank account. Asterisk. The gasps were audible. A woman in the front row fainted. The boy dropped the pitcher, the crash of glass shattering the spell. Cedric stood frozen, watching himself on the giant screen. The color drained from his face, leaving him a ghostly gray. He turned to me, eyes wide with shock, and then, pure, unadulterated rage. You, he snarled. You filmed this? You knew? And you still married me. I had to marry you to activate the clause, Cedric. I replied smoothly. If I had exposed you before the vows, it would have just been a broken engagement. But now it's a legal breach of a consummated contract. You don't just lose me. You lose half of everything you own. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The Thorne family fortune, the military funding, half of it was now mine. I will kill you, Cedric roared. He lunged. It was a foolish move. An alpha attacking his omega in public is a crime punishable by exile, but Cedric was beyond reason. He unleashed his pheromones, a crushing wave of dominance designed to force me to my knees, to paralyze me with biological fear. The pressure hit me. My breath hitched. My legs trembled. I was an omega, biology was a cruel master. But before Cedric could reach me, a black blur moved across the dais. A hand, gloved in black leather, caught Cedric by the throat. Kalen Drax didn't just stop him, he lifted him. With one hand, the general hoisted the struggling prince off the ground, his feet dangling uselessly. That, Kalen growled, his voice a low thunder that vibrated through the floorboards, is enough. Kalen's pheromones exploded outward, not the suffocating smog of Cedric's scent, but a clean, cold storm. It was the scent of absolute authority. The Enigma class. Even the other alphas in the room lowered their heads instinctively. Cedric clawed at Kalen's hand, choking, his eyes rolling back. General Drax, I said calmly, stepping up beside them. Please, don't damage the merchandise. He has assets to transfer. Kalen looked at me. For the first time, there was no mockery in his eyes. Only respect. And something darker. Desire. He tossed Cedric aside like a rag doll. The prince crashed into the wedding cake, collapsing in a heap of frosting and humiliation. Kalen turned to the crowd, his his hand resting casually on the hilt of the ceremonial saber at his hip. The wedding is over. The reception is cancelled. And if anyone attempts to stop Mr. Vance from leaving, he paused, a feral grin touching his lips, I will consider it an act of treason against the crown's justice. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. I looked at my parents. My father was pale, calculating the losses and gains. My mother looked at me with a strange expression. Fear, perhaps? Or awe. I didn't care. I walked over to Cedric, who was coughing, trying to wipe cream from his eyes. I crouched down, careful not to let my hem touch the mess. You called me a statue, Cedric, I whispered. You forgot that statues are made of stone. We don't break. I stood up and turned to Kalen. General, is that car still waiting? Kalen offered me his arm. It is. Engine running. Take me away from here. With pleasure. We walked out of the ballroom together. The sea of guests parted for us, a mix of fear and reverence in their eyes. I didn't look back. I didn't look at the ruin I had caused or the family I had destroyed. As we stepped out into the cool night air, the heavy doors of the palace closing behind us with a final thud, the adrenaline finally began to fade, leaving me shaking. Kalen stopped. He pulled off his heavy military coat, draped it over my shoulders, and pulled the collar up to cover my neck, masking the scent of distress with his own scent of rain and steel. You are terrifying, Lysander, he murmured, his thumb grazing my cheekbone. Is that a complaint? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. No, Kalen said, opening the car door for me. His eyes burned with a promise of a different kind of fire. It's a proposal. As the car sped away into the neon-lit darkness of the capital, I leaned back against the leather seats. I had lost a husband, a family, and a reputation tonight. But looking at the silhouette of the wolf sitting beside me, I had a feeling I had won something far more dangerous. And that is how the statue crumbled the empire. If you enjoyed seeing Lysander destroy his ex with cold, hard logic, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you have taken the money and revenge, or would you have run away before the wedding? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.